Greetings! My name's Steve, and I am going to do a short video on something that should actually be very easy, but turns out to be a royal pain in the butt. For anybody who owns a 2010 era, or first generation Ford Fusion Hybrid, or Mercury Milan, or Lincoln MKZ hybrid vehicle. It seems that the battery, which is smaller than your typical battery, is generally sourced only through the dealer. I tried looking at numerous places for replacement and only found that they were available through the dealer. But I did go to Costco and I located a battery which supposedly is made for a 2013 Fusion Hybrid. I've since been told that that actually may have been an owner's misprint and that the battery is not actually the one that's necessary for the second generation hybrids from Ford. But I also found out that the later generation hybrids have some electronics that need to be reset by the Ford dealer, and that even if you could source the battery, you couldn't easily reset and replace and set all the battery parameters for those hybrids. On our models, the earlier Generation 1 model, that's not the case from everything that I've read and heard. So, it turns out that, and I'm going to show you the battery, this is the stock battery that came with my Mercury Milan Hybrid back in 2010. It's, as you can see from the label, a Motorcraft 390 amp battery with a 65 reserve cranking amp and a 43 amp hour listing. It's a small battery. The reason it's a small battery is because this battery is not required to actually start the engine. All it does is runs the 12 volt equipment and monitoring and electronics in the car. And ironically enough, if this battery isn't working properly, isn't showing 12 volts, the hybrid system, which runs off of a much higher capacity battery pack that runs all the hybrid motors and such, will not power up. So you could have a perfectly good hybrid battery and a weak 12 volt battery, and you'll be stuck in a parking lot in your driveway by the side of the road because the car won't start unless it sees 12 volts to the electronics that monitor everything. I think this is ridiculous. I think it's a very poor design. There should be at least some kind of a fail-safe in the car that will let you start it and run it even if the battery is weak. I've also been told that this battery is used to level out the high voltage DC to low voltage 12 volt converter that runs the car once it's on, once it's started. So this battery actually does very, very little in operation except to smooth out that power to take the excess 12 volts that's being generated by the large hybrid battery and create a nice, or help to create a nice clean flow of 12 volts to the rest of the car, be it the fan motors, the air conditioning, the radio, the electronics that actually monitor the hybrid system, and so on and so forth. So anyway, what I found is that with this battery, it's worked pretty well. However, I run a lot of electronic equipment in my car. I run a dash cam, I charge my phones, it's got a 12 volt to 110 volt inverter that constantly has a power pack charge plugged into it. And so this battery at 390 amps and 65 reserve amps is actually probably a little bit low for everyday operation, and my battery after 5-6 years has gone bad. The Costco battery, which I will show you, is a 590 cold cranking amp battery. It's currently in the trunk waiting to be used. This is an interstate battery. It's a group 32, fitment code 32. It's got a 42-month replacement, and this one has 590 cold cranking amps, so 200 more than the OEM battery. It's got 740 cranking amps at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's got a reserve capacity of 95 amps versus the 65 on the original battery. As far as I can tell, this battery is dimensionally the same as the 390 amp battery that's in the car. Since I haven't pulled that battery out yet, I don't know 100% that it's going to be an exact replacement. However, I believe that it will be. And that's what we're going to try and do today. And if this works, this was a $90 battery at Costco. And if it works, you could either go to Costco and buy that same battery, or you could go and buy an equivalent battery from somewhere else. I'm sure other places sell that Group 32 style battery, or was it 42? Whatever it was I said before, that's the one it was. And perhaps save yourself a lot of money and aggravation having to go to an actual Ford dealer in order to get this battery replaced. So that being said, first thing I have to do is get the OEM battery out. And once I've done that, I will compare the dimensions exactly to the new battery and see whether or not I can make the new battery fit. But I believe it will. And I'm cautiously optimistic. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to disconnect the power cables from the old battery. And those cables are held on by these two 5/16 inch nuts, which we'll release. And once we do that, we'll be able to spread this gently and remove power to the battery. Safety first. And it looks as though you don't actually have to take them off. You just have to loosen them up. And that releases the tension. So you can see these pieces are now free to move. And I will get them off, but since I am holding this camera, I'm going to have to put it down. And actually, before we even disconnect the power, because you can see the negative cable is blocked by the air intake, we're going to have to remove the air intake and get that out of the way. And that is also 5/16. So we loosen that, and we loosen this. And once we've loosened that, we'll see if we can get this thing out of the way without having to completely take it off at the other end. There is a flexible point right here, and I believe we can pull it out and get it out of the way. But I'm going to need two hands for that, so bear with me. So I'm going to revise what I just said. We don't loosen this hose up here. This attachment piece is held on by a single nut, or a single bolt rather, right here, which happens to also be the same 5/16 inch size. If you loosen it up so that it pops out, you can lift this whole piece up, and then together with a little bit of twisting of this piece, you can get the air intake off. And again, without two hands, it's a pain, so let's see if I can muddle through by using my chin. I guess I can't. All right, bear with me. I'll pull it out of the way and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so with two hands, I was able to pull the air intake off, and pulling back a bit, you can see I can raise it up and out of the way. And by the way, the bolt that comes through this point right here, make sure you take it out first so you don't flip it up and lose it in the engine compartment. And I just stuck it right into place here loosely so that when I put it back, I'll know where it is. Once we've done that, this can just be moved out of the way and you have access to the battery. So now with that said, I'm going to remove the battery cable as well. First with the negative ground cable. Put my glove back on, try and keep my hand clean. See if this simply pops off. Yeah, so you can see it's moving. And with one hand, it's a little bit of a challenge. So I may put down the camera again to get this off. But I will take both of the terminals off, ground first, then the positive. Bear with me. Okay. With the cables removed, and it was much easier to loosen up those cables and use a small screwdriver to pry them out and off with gentle pressure. I'm able to now see the battery. There's a little clip here to a sensor on the intake. You're going to want to unclip that. And let me see if I can find the clip that will unplug that easily. It looks like this red piece down here may be the key. Let's see if I can find it. Either that or you're squeezing one of the other pieces in here. No, I think it's the red piece. I'm going to try squeezing that and pulling out. Once again, 2 hands may be better than 1. Bear with me. Let me get that off, because that is blocking the bolt that holds the battery down. Okay, the answer is this. This little red tab pushes out, or pushes in to lock, and then you can take a small flat bladed screwdriver and just give it a simple little pry out like this. And when you do that, it releases the clip, which will then slide out very easily. So, out we go, and now that is out of the way. And we have access to the mounting bolt that is clamping down the battery and holding it in place. Let's see if that is also 5/16. Murphy's Law will tell me that it's not, but logic says it should be, and it is. So, loosening up that 5/16 bolt and pulling the clamp out of the way, and the battery now should be free and clear to come out. I'm going to have to set down the camera and check to see if that's actually the case. Okay, so looking at the batteries, you can see that dimensionally they are the same. However, I have just discovered that Ford decided in their infinite wisdom to put the tabs for the hybrid battery, the OEM battery, on the sides. On the replacement battery, they're on the front and the back. So that means that this battery is not going to fit unless I do 2 things. Number 1, I'm going to have to take the tab off of the back here so that it will sit in the tray that is designed for a tab not to be there. The second thing that I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to improvise in terms of the clamps. I'm going to have to create a clamp that will come around and hold the battery on both sides or from back to front. Because I don't see any point in spending big bucks to let the dealer put in a substandard battery, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Never put a battery into a car that is not properly strapped down. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble. You always want the battery secure. However, this is not a major job. It just involves a little bit of creativity to create a clamp that will hold the battery in place. And that's what I will do. And in fact, instead of modifying the battery, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to modify the holder so that there's a slot right under here that allows that tab on the back of the battery, or in this case on the front of the battery, to slip underneath. And once it's in place, that will help hold it down. Then all I have to do is create a clamp that will come up from the front and clamp onto the battery or over the battery in such a way that it stays firmly in place. And that will solve my battery mounting problem with a very minor amount of modification to the tray. I may need to take this tab off. This side tab is designed for the OEM battery for that other tab to slide underneath. We'll see if that's necessary. It may be, it may not be, but I will go from there and let you know what I finally decided to do. So it turns out that the new battery is also about 1 inch longer than the old one. I cannot move it out this way because this piece is in the way. There is a little bit of leeway for the battery there because there's a clamp that sits down on this side, and so the battery itself doesn't come that far. But I am going to modify this end to let the battery come out a little bit more this way. There's a little bit of play in this harness that the battery can press against without any ill effect. I'm going to take out the battery tray to make the modifications work, and that is going to require a 10 millimeter long socket to get down there. So I will get the battery plate out and we will modify that and make it fit this battery so we can upgrade to bigger and better. So it looks like in order to get the best result, I'm going to be able to grind off the corner here and here to allow the battery to slide over a little bit over this, what was the old mounting or clamping spot on the old tray arrangement. The battery will come to about this point. It'll come up to the base, leaving just enough room for that sensor to sit next to the new battery. The battery will be slightly closer, but not too close. And then I will cut a slice through this, the back of this, right where the tab on the new battery would go through, and that will help hold it in on that end. I will take this side off entirely so that the battery can sit a little bit further out of the tray on that side, and there's a little room for that to happen. And then I will have to make a clamp that will hold the battery down from here. And I think what I might do to make that happen is I might create a piece of strap metal that will mount underneath this hole below the battery, or maybe even make a slot. I could make a slot that it could go down and clamp down to the bottom. So now the bolt is holding it from underneath, and then the strap metal can come over the top, and then I can create an attachment point, maybe even a bolt hole right through the core support here, and that will hold the battery down. That might do a nice job. Let's see how it goes, and I'll get back to you in a moment. So, here's what I've done with the plate. I wound up having to widen the edge here, which was not, it didn't come all the way across. It came up to about this point, and it came up to about this point. And there was an area in here that there was no plastic. I wound up cutting out a notch here and a notch there to let the lip from the back of the battery sit flat. I wound up, and I'm showing you this kind of in an upside down view, wound up cutting out a notch on this side that allows the lip on the front of the battery to slide in and kind of notch it in and hold it in place. And then, if you'll remember from the earlier view, there was a wall that came all the way across that was the same height as this and to the back. I cut that entirely off. That allows the battery to sit slightly past this point. There's a little bit of give on the harness here for the battery to stick slightly further out. And the other thing that I did, and this is also critical, was I cut out the corners, as I mentioned before, of the box there and here. And that allows the battery to sit further over. It's now covers part, but not all, of this hole. And that enables me to still have clearance to plug this sensor back in when the battery's in place. I'm going to cinch the box down now, and then what I may do, I haven't figured it out entirely yet, but what I think I'm going to do is I'm probably going to put a hole in the core support here as it wraps around and create a metal bracket that will press down and around the battery. The battery is very, very snug where it is. It really can't shift side to side. The trick is to put some pressure down on it just to hold it in place. And if I create a bracket that will just press down on the top of the battery, and with a wide plate so that I'm not putting pressure in any one place, that will hold the battery snugly in place through everything except a major accident, which is going to mangle all of this anyway. And that should give us the firm, safe mounting that we need. So now let me get the battery back in place after I snug all of these 4 nuts down, and I will work out the bracket. Okay, as you can see, the battery is now sitting in the tray, and right here in the corner there, it just comes up to the plastic piece here that is the core support for the radiator and the front of the car. And on this side, you could probably not see down into that area, but the sensor, the air sensor that is down in there, let me see if I can get a light down into there and make it a little more easy to see. But there is a plug that's coming right down, and it's got clearance from the battery just like it did from the original. There it is. And in the front, there's clearance in the front, clearance to this wiring harness in the front, or I should say that was the rear, and this is the side, but the front of the car. and everything is reconnected and everything fits just fine. The only thing left for me to do is to figure out how to strap this down. What I will probably do is I will make up a band strap that will go from that bolt, one of those 4 bolts that's underneath the battery. I'll have it come through, come up here, and then come across, and I'll drill a hole that will enable me to anchor it in the core support, which is ribbed. Even though it's plastic, it's ribbed all the way along for strength. So that should be more than sturdy enough to hold the battery in place. And as it is right now, the battery is very firmly in place. There's really no way, even if it were not tethered down, that it could go anywhere except in a violent accident. So I'm pretty happy with the modification. I've now got a battery that is standard, can be purchased in any Costco. And as I mentioned before, there's the battery. Interstate, 590 CCA, cold cranking amps. 95 reserve cranking amps, or reserve amps. 740 cranking amps at freezing, 32 degrees. And right here is the item number. That's the Costco item number. If you want to go and duplicate this battery and put a little work into it, you'll never have to worry about going to the Ford dealer again to replace the battery with what I consider to be a substandard sized battery at only 390 cold cranking amps and 65 amps of reserve. So this Interstate should take care of me for a long term, and I'm not going to think too much about it once I've got the bracket made up and have it strapped down. Good luck. All right, folks, here is my solution for strapping down the battery. As you can see, it is very, very snug. I stuck a little piece of rubber inner tube in the corner here just to make sure there wouldn't be any abrasion over time. And then, if you look underneath, which is hard to do, you'll see that plastic piece that I had told you about that's part of the radiator core. That hole wraps all the way around. It's very, very tough. And underneath, there is a little notch. So what I did was I created a bracket with a notch that hooks underneath there and welded it. You don't have to weld it. You could bend and notch a single piece on your own, but I have the welder, so I took advantage of it. And I put it in, or set it up so that it goes in like this and then pivots over. When it pivots over, it comes down and clamps down the battery. On this side, I drilled a hole, and this is a standard battery hook that I cut shorter once I knew the length to hold the battery without the hood contacting it. And what happens is the battery tray has some spots underneath where you can hook it on and bring it up and then put it through that piece, and then with this rubber and the washer and the wing nut that comes with this hook piece, you clamp it down. The last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this piece with, again, a piece of inner tube from a bicycle. It'll slide over here, go over that. It'll serve two purposes. One, it'll help cushion the battery as I'm holding it down. Secondly, it will help to prevent any possibility of short circuits from the power to the main bracket. It's not a big deal, but actually there's really no way it could short circuit because this hook and the hook on the other end are all going to plastic pieces. So unless there's some metal contacting it, which in this part of the car there isn't, there's really no danger of short circuiting at all. But better safe than sorry. It'll provide a little bit of cushioning and help to press the battery down and prevent abrading of this bracket that I made. So that's how I'm going to do it. Let me hook it up. Oh, by the way, you can reach around the back of the battery and down into this area to feel where the hook point will be for this piece. I'm going to have to put the camera down to actually get it hooked in, but I'll show you what it looks like when it's all finished. Okay, so there's the finished piece. This metal washer that I've got in here really is only there to help this nut turn easily while I'm crushing down on this rubber pad. And the rubber pad, by the way, came with the battery hold down bracket. I think it's designed to go possibly on the other end, you know, or in between the battery and the bracket that's made for this type of installation. But since I made my own bracket, this rubber piece is better suited where I've got it to help create tension, and I've done just that. So this bracket is now cranked down and holding the battery down. It's not holding as much in the center. There's a little bit of leeway there. If I had used a stiffer bracket even than I have, it probably would have been more effective. But I've got a nice clamping force along this edge here and along this area here, and the battery is locked into the box at the bottom with those little corners that I left in. So it can't slide back and forth, and since it can't come up, it's not going anywhere. We now have a nice safe battery, and more importantly, I've now got a standard battery that anytime I need a replacement, I can stick it in and buy it at any Costco or somewhere else. It's possible that you might find a battery that has a bunch of tabs that go from front to rear, but I think that's part of what makes the OEM battery so difficult to source. I looked in a couple of places and I did not find any standard batteries that had that front-rear arrangement the same as the original battery. So I was forced to make the modification, and I'm very happy with it. 200 more cold cranking amps, up to 95 reserve versus 65, and 740 cranking amps at freezing. Not that this car needs that, it really doesn't, because this battery doesn't ever actually crank the motor. But for all of the advantages of having that extra capacity for running my high draw devices in the car, this was a great solution for me, and I highly recommend it if you want to say bye-bye to the dealer on replacing a battery. And it took me some time to get the modifications done, a couple hours worth of work versus what should be a 5-10 minute battery swap. However, the fact that I can now change the battery out in the same 10 to 15 minutes that it would take to do if it had been designed properly in the first place makes it all worthwhile to me moving forward down the road. I hope this has been helpful, and that it saves some of you a lot of money and aggravation in the future. Enjoy!